Okay, this is Fort Walla Walla in Walla Walla, Washington. Old fort and museum, agricultural museum, historical museum of the area. Yeah, what's your name and where are we here?
Oh, I'm Gale Kibbler, your tour leader, such at Fort Walla Walla Museum.
Why don't you pull out a couple of stocks and show me what's the useful part and what's the part you throw away?
Oh, yes. There's some of the kernels.
Okay, is that a good sized kernel?
Yeah, that's a fair size. It's average size, about average size kernel.
Okay, and how many of those would make a pound? Or?
I have no idea. I take quite a few out now. In the 1860s, when it was first started to be cultivated,
And why would it be cultivated here?
Well,
soil, climate, or
the climate and everything was.
People just like to grow it.
No, they figured it. The valley was. They thought at first it was nothing but stock, horses and cattle. There was lots of good grass, but they needed some grain for flour, for people food. So they started trial seeding a little wheat, and it happened to yield real well, and so it just kept growing pretty fast in acres. And there was a demand for it all the way down to in the Oregon, the Willamette Valley, so there was quite a need for it. The first way they thrashed wheat was with this cradle, scythe and cradle. And one man had run that, cut the grain, put it in little piles, and
point it out to me, because I don't know what.
yeah, this deal right there is the cradle, and
that's a metal scythe with some wooden sticks on it. And that's a cradle.
Yeah, that's the cradle.
And that directs it one way?
It directs the grain one way and puts it in a little pile. And it lays on the ground so it can dry. Then after it dries, they put it out on the hard, smooth ground someplace, and they take this frail here, that handle there with a club on the end of it.
A frail? A flail?
Flail.
Flail. They flail it.
Flail. And they would hammer the grain out of the heads. Then they would scoop off the heavy straw, pick up the wheat and chaff, and then unless it was a windy day, well, they'd use this big bellows here for wind, and the man would stand up on a platform and pour the grain out of the bucket in front of that bellows, and it blew the chaff out of the wheat. That's the way they did the first thrashing. So then, of course, when they got more acres, they had to have better ways of cutting the grain, and they went over here to this binder then.
Okay, why don't we go over there? I'll follow you.
This mechanical John Deere binder that would cut the grain. 3 horses pulled it.
You have just metal wheels and looks pretty elaborate compared to the hand method.
Yes, it was quite well. This right picture here was the first one, really. It's a little different.
Oh, it's like a little portable model.
Mm-hmm. And
you
then
sit on the side and.
Yeah, and then it.
Yeah.
Call it a push header.
Yeah, and what year would this have started?
Well, it wasn't very far behind that binder there. It says there 1911 to 1922, but it was probably 1910 to about 1930.
And then what do you call these things?
That's a reel.
A reel, and then the reel would sweep it onto the
platform.
And then what's that? A conveyor belt?
Yeah, it's like a conveyor belt. They call it a draper conveyor belt.
A draper?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then
carried it up this elevator.
Okay, then it would be conveyed up the elevator, and what would happen to it then?
Over into this wagon.
Okay, and then you'd pull a wagon up to it.
Along the side.
And it would just convey it all into a wagon, and you.
The wagon followed right along with the header.
Okay, and then once one of these wagons were filled, what would they do with it?
Well, they bring it up here then to the stationary combine. Drive right along this feeder there.
This would be the
Feeder.
intake here?
And
Somebody would what?
Two men would pitch it into that feeder.
Okay, there's a feeder. It looks like a conveyor belt of some kind.
Yeah, kind of the same.
And a couple guys would stand on there and load it slowly as it gets conveyed up, huh?
Yes.
Okay, and then what's this thing do?
It threshes the wheat out of the straw.
Oh, it separates the wheat kernels from all the chaff and the stalks. Okay, that's a huge machine. Show me the output side here. What happens over here?
Well, come back here, this big pipe here, that's where the straw goes out. There's a
all the straw, the stalks, and the chaff, and it just gets what? It gets
it's put in a big pile back there.
Into a pile. And what would they do with that stuff?
Oh, they burn some of it, the steam engine that runs the
power.
machine.
Oh, there's a.
And then they use it.
There's an engine on this thing.
Oh yeah. Then they use it for feed. And this is where the clean grain comes out.
Okay.
Put into the burlap sacks.
Get this before. Okay, here the big belt system that connects this machine with a steam engine way back there. Must be a 30-40 foot long belt here.
Yeah, 40 foot steam engine.
Almost looks like a locomotive.
Yeah,
it's almost as big. This is it looks like a ancient tractor almost. Is it self-propelled at all or not? It's got to be pulled or pushed by horses?
Oh, it's self-propelled.
Oh, it is. So you could actually drive it.
Yeah, you drive it.
But its main purpose is an engine to power all these.
Any stationary equipment.
Yeah.
It can drive itself, move itself, but it can't pull anything that's too heavy.
What year was this one here made?
Let's see, somewhere around here it tells us. It was patented in 1886.
So this would have been in use after that.
Yeah, long than that.
Up until what time would they have used something like this?
Oh, this one was used as drove in here.
Oh, really?
10 years ago, 7 years ago.
And it was somebody was actually using it up until the time it was driven into the museum.
In here. Yeah, it makes real good belt power.
Yeah.
Those days that this equipment was used, the ground was fallowed. You raise grain on the ground every other year.
Not every year.
Every other year. 1 year you'd have grain on it 1 year. The next year, the spring you'd plow the ground up, turn the old stubble and trash in the ground, and you'd leave it set and keep the weeds and everything off of it during the season. And then you'd seed it to wheat that fall, say along in October. And then you'd harvest it the next July. And that way you had to leave it to build up enough moisture to raise the crop through that 1 year.
Okay, and there's no way you could rotate it with some other crop?
Well, they do now with different crops, but not.
What would they rotate it with?
Well, now the biggest one is green peas.
Peas? They'd rotate with peas for 1 year?
Peas 1 year and wheat the next.
Okay.
And then there's other things. They've got canola now and garbanzos and
certain
that's the main thing.
Certain combinations of plants replenish the soil instead of deplete it.
You
like
gotta have try to get a crop that doesn't take the same thing out of the soil every year. You rotate with a crop that will replenish something, take something else out of the soil.
Okay. But at the turn of the century, when they're using this stuff, did they know that, like they do now, or
well, not as well
they just
as
fallow
now,
the field?
They knew that that's what had to do to be able to raise a good crop.
To fallow it, but
I learned that pretty fast.
To fallow it, but
yes.
What about rotating it?
Well, yeah, that'd be rotating.
If they knew they could raise peas
no,
every other year, also, would they?
They didn't know that.
They didn't know that then.
They didn't know that till long in the first part of the 30s.
Oh, okay. So
they started that.
Okay, now what's this next building house here?
That's a 33 mule team pulling a combine thrasher.
Okay, now we got a whole bunch of mules or horses.
What?
What's a combine?
Oh, well, that cuts the grain and conveyors it into the threshing part and thrashes the grain out of the straw, all in one operation.
So it does everything we saw in the other room all in one operation, except
that's right. Mm-hmm.
Except the cookhouse and the water tank.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. What would they use today? This was used up until what year?
Oh, these pretty well went out of use in 35. I was
around the time of the Depression.
Yeah.
And then what took over the job here?
Well, the mules went out. Well, then caterpillars came in and said first part of the 30s.
Which is what?
And they taken over the job of all the mules. They pulled the same piece of equipment, but they didn't have to have the mules when caterpillars came out.
And that was basically a gas engine or a diesel engine, right?
Yeah, gas at first.
But you don't have to feed the thing.
No, you don't. You have to, well, what's great about the tractor, you don't have to feed them when they're not working. These, you got to feed them year-round if they work or not. And the tractors, well, when they're not out in the field working, well, they don't need to be fed. That's a big advantage.
Oh, here's a shot of this machine or ones like it actually in use.
Yeah, there's 5 of them there.
Well, 5 of them all working at once. 1910, George Drumheller.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like small farming is just out of the question now, at least in wheat or this area.
You've got to have at least a couple thousand acres to be able to manage it all now, to keep your machinery busy enough to be able to own it.
So the only way you could, be a farmer is to inherit the farm or something, right?
Yeah, you just
is that true?
That's just about true. You got to inherit from you. Of course, an awful lot of these farms around here are still the same family that homesteaded the ground.
Well, with good reason.
They've added to it.
That's
and
right.
Bought out to other farmers that couldn't make a go of it, or there's a lot of them here in the last few years that went bankrupt, and there's other farmers ready to take over. A lot of the ground belongs to banks and insurance companies and colleges and people that's got more money.
Yeah. What about you? Have you been a farmer most of your life?
All my life, yeah.
All your life?
Yeah.
Where you grew up right here somewhere?
Oh yeah, just east of Walla Walla.
And you still own a working farm?
Oh yeah.
How many acres are you farming?
Oh, I own 550, and we lease a couple thousand.
And plus you lease a couple thousand of somebody else who gave up farming?
Yeah, retired and one thing.
We got tired.
Yeah.
And
there's hardly very few young people who go to farming anymore.
Well, how do you see the future of wheat farming in that case?
Well, it just doesn't look very good. That's all I can tell you.
Well, somebody's going to be farming in some form or another, You see it as a whole agribusiness?
Right.
Somebody, you see it all going away from the family farm?
There's going to be less and less farmers all the time, go into big companies and corporations. Has to be big outfits.
Just going in the direction of corporate farming. It'll just be a huge business of some kind with no personal tie to it.
That's right.
Strictly on the market price, daily quote
somebody
price.
Big enough that can tell them what they got to have to be able to raise that crop, or you go and starve to death, one or the other. These big companies, they know what they have to produce, and so that's what they get. But we take what they give us. We don't ask what we want. And big companies, they tell them what we want. That's what they get.
Oh.
And see, we're not big enough for that.
Oh, I see. And there's no cooperative system?
There's cooperatives, but that's too small.
They don't have any clout?
See, all farm-related people, there's only 2% of the United States. And what can 2% do with the other 98%? So you don't have a very big voice.
Okay, I guess that's true, but...
Yeah, it is true.
Well...
go ahead. They're not interested in farming. You talk to any farmer that's worked in Washington, D.C., that goes back there, we're back there all the time scrapping with them, and they don't care about the farmer too much. There's other interests that's worth a lot more to them.
Yeah.
And you ask them where their bread comes from. They go, out of the storeroom at Safeway. That's all they know.